So this thing is a wet palette? Alright, there's a lot on the market for wet palettes, and they all want to do 3 things, generally speaking. The most important part is to keep paint moist. Next is offer space to use these acrylic moist paints. And lastly, for some reason, a lot of these wet palettes want to work as storage space for bits, gubbins, brushes, and all the other doodads that you keep at your painting space. I own 2 wet palettes, and they do all 3. None of them do it all perfectly, and I have not tried the Red Grass Games wet palette, because I'm broke. So this is the Cry Droofy all-in-one modular art box solution. All-in-one solution is interesting, but nah, not really. Okay, hobbyists who do this on YouTube are probably not in the market for an item like this. I have this space specifically to do hobby stuff and videos. I have space, basically. This is clearly designed to be an all-in-one dad shares space with the kids in a small house hobby kit. So basically, it's not for someone like me. I mean, it's got a handle, and that helps it become an all-in-one mobile unit. It's clearly meant to move around. This is also clearly a beginner product. You get this thing and it's loaded with all these hobby tips and hobby housekeeping things. You know, stuff like don't let water sit in a wet palette, it builds bacteria, don't let brushes sit in dirty paint water. Really basic stuff that if you're brand spanking new to the hobby, you might not actually know about. Okay, so this product is literally designed to be used by the exact kind of person that I'm not. Other reviews probably might not touch on the aspect of skill level in the basis of you buying hobby products. This is the most expensive version that I got. It's loaded with all these things, so we'll get into the price later, but let's talk about the build quality of this. So this thing is basically Lego blocks, painter tools. Each layer is that of a cake with a specific tool on each layer. Paint holding, water holding, brush holding, in these interlocking, satisfying square rectangle things. Literally everything in this set snaps together. And then again, this is the upside of it. It has this house mobility. I mean, you're not going to travel with this thing, but you can take it from the basement to the living room really easily. I honestly can't get over how ridiculous this thing looks upright. It's incredibly tall. It's about 2 Citadel paint holders tall if you need a reference. Now, I gotta be honest, I think all the extra engineering in this thing leads to a lot of extra faffing about. I want the ease the method from work to hobby. You know, take off a lid and get going. The way the wet palette is, well, it's basically 2 tiny wet palettes put together. I kind of don't like this, and it requires these really small papers that are specific to the item itself. Though I imagine you could just cut up the regular, you know, wet palette paper and throw it on. Also, last note about the design of the buckets of these things. They're not clear plastic, and I think it would help with cleaning if they were clear plastic. However, it does have a silicone sponge on the bottom for getting paint off the brush, which is a good addition. Lastly, before I get to the actual use of this thing, let's talk about price. Now, the model they gave for review is a pre-release Kickstarter thing, and it's also the Ultra version, which is a lot. And full disclosure, they gave us an affiliate link, but the Ultra is $40 during the Kickstarter, which is a good price, but it puts it in the higher price range with wet palettes being around on par with the Painter V2 from Red Grass Games at $44. Meanwhile, Army Painter also sells a wet palette for beginners at $32.99 USD. Even still, price-wise, you can find cheaper alternatives elsewhere, either at a physical store or on Amazon. Now, retail for the Ultra is $60, which puts it at a pretty high level. Now, they sell one that's called the miniature set, and that retails at $50, which is more reasonable, but again, you need to fit a very specific niche for this item. There's another set that's a single wet palette and a dry palette. I say swap out the dry for another wet palette, and at $40 retail, that's an absolute buy. Maybe mix and match system on their website would be pretty appropriate for an item that is sold in these little compartments like this. I'm not sold. I'm pretty conflicted on it personally, but again, that's just because it doesn't fit my specific needs at all. Except one thing on this box. When I got the box, it said that it will keep paint wet for 60 days. 60 days. Now, I got this product pretty recently. I haven't had that much time to test it, and I also do a bunch of other stuff, but 60 days is an obscene amount of time. So what I did for you, and honestly I can't imagine holding your paint for 60 days. I left the paint in the wet palette for 72 hours, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's get into the use of this thing. Right, so I've been busy doing a D&D live show that I run over there, but I fiddled with an orc recently. The palette, as I guessed, is too small. It's very cramped, and even the two separate spaces, I learned pretty quickly that I like a big contiguous space. I like to mix colors, spread it around, make a mess on my wet palettes. The dry palettes I didn't use for two reasons. One, I try to avoid oils, and two, I hate cleaning these things. I'd much rather buy a sheet of cheap palettes or even something disposable than something as nice as this. I'm just afraid to dirty it up and have trouble cleaning it up later. But you know what's always nice and not a hassle? Our coffee and tea. That's right, we sell D&D themed coffee and tea, and right now for the month of November, the tea is $10. Head over to manapotioncoffee.com today to try it out. I mean, $10 is a steal for this stuff, I'm just saying. Now, I know this seems like a joke, but the best part of this system is actually the cups. In the use of this thing, I find it to be an awesome tool having these silicone sponges. It's multifunctional, compact, yet useful. Outside of the opaque plastic, this is the best part of the system, hands down. The rubber on the bottom helps remove a lot of the paint from the brush. The brush holders work without hassle. Much like Todd Howard, it just works. Okay, so let's check out the paint 72 hours later. Okay, some of the medium and pigment has separated, but that's to be expected. It's sitting still, not being moved around at all. The important part is it still wet? Could you mix it again? As long as the globs of acrylic are thick enough, the paint should remain wet. Thinner globs seem to have hardened out, but more of the paint here is usable than not. It's not 100%, and it seems Vallejo model color fared the best, with GW faring the worst. This could be due to a mixture of different chemicals in the paint or specific agents that help with drying out the paint more quickly, either that or a lack of water. I keep the room pretty hot down here, so that could also impact it. Really, this thing is a mixed bag for a painter like me. I think the market for someone who's lacking space is more common than somebody who's a hobby YouTuber, so I can see that it has its place, and I can see how pieces of this are going to be joining my tool set. I'm going to continue using this for the next month to see how it fares and how I paint things. Of course, there are negatives, there's no end-all be-all, but it does have a lot of up. I think ultimately there's few questions you should ask yourself before this is something you dive into. If you're someone with a dedicated hobby space, then maybe don't get this. But if you travel around or you live in a small apartment, maybe this is for you. Do you enjoy painting, or are you more concerned with the armies you build? If you enjoy the armies and playing, maybe this is for you because you're very simple, you just want the minimal paint jobs that you need, the field and army. Do you need something mobile? Then maybe this is for you. These things seem really simple, but ultimately when you're living in that situation, you could find it much more useful. I'm incredibly blessed with the big space that I have, so I get why this wouldn't appeal to me necessarily. But again, if you're somebody who's lacking the space, this is probably going to be something you'd want to look at because it's small, compact, allows you to go from place to place, and I mean, ultimately, it's really great build quality from a company that I haven't heard of before. And that's pretty impressive considering a lot of Kickstarter products come out and the fit and finish is incredibly terrible. I mean, there is something to be said for the engineering here. It's incredibly, incredibly innovative and super to the point. It's honestly the best part of this. It's super neat and weird looking, and I like that. So I will definitely keep using pieces of this. As for if I use the whole thing, probably not. But I definitely do see a space for this in the market. And honestly, I think it's about time we get some variation in the way that wet palettes look from the general square rectangle with storage space on top. This is a new and unique way to do it, so I'm pretty stoked to see what this company comes up with next. Anyway, make sure to like and subscribe to Mana Potion Tabletop. And if you like this, maybe check out our review of Dungeon Alchemist, the VTT Dungeon Maker.